That's great. So, and that brings me to a point where I'm interested about knowing this is real common right now to be talking about AI and things of that nature. And I find myself in a position that I feel real optimistic about it. And even more so because this week I was having, or not having, but watching a conversation actually with the guy that I mentioned last week on his podcast. His name is Lex Friedman, MIT, graduate, and he's an engineer. And so the person that he brought on this week, made a really interesting point, and that it almost made me even more excited to a certain extent. Where the guy basically was talking about how if we assume that this AI technology is getting smarter and smarter, and that it's going to compound and it's going to get to the point where, let's say, it takes over, if that's the inevitable point in that aspect. So what does that lead us, or what does that lead him to understand? And he broke it down in a way where it's like it's going to humble everybody. It's going to humble the world to the point where it's like, let's say if it were to wipe out jobs, which is like one of the hot topics. It's like, okay, so what are going to happen to all these jobs? And so he put it in a framework where it's like, yeah, people are going to be humbled, and they're going to realize that the humanitarian work that's left to do is so abundant. There's so much on a person to person level to be done that it's like, if that's the inevitable and it's going to happen where AI takes over, then likely there's no way around that. It's just fate, the way that it's supposed to be. So, but it's going to put us to have to reframe what we hold true and value. And I think it's what we're doing in this space, and I believe it's what you try to do out of this space, and I as well try to do that, on a humanitarian level, just through conversation. The same things that we were talking about, or that you brought to me my attention. It's like when I'm reading these things that I'm reading and that I'm taking notes on, go out into the world and express these ideas, these thoughts, these new truths to other people in conversation, And so I've done that throughout this week, and that glimpse that I was able to get out of that conversation, it almost made me like, oh yeah, I'm even more optimistic about it, because it's like, if if I didn't have this camera anymore because now it's an AI or XYZ, then it's like there's still you and I left out there, and there's a considerable amount of hurting in the world as far as I see it. There's a considerable amount of people that need guidance, that maybe either for lack of resources or lack of XYZ, there's nobody there really to support them. You see these people on the streets, you see these people that, don't have, clean resources for water or any of those other resources that we kind of like take for granted sometimes in like our nation. And so it's like, man, if everything was wiped out, there's so much work, real work, like important stuff to do, that it's like, I think that's bigger than the AI, and it is a refreshing framework to try to look at it in that perspective, where it's like, all right, now we got to get down on our hands and knees and pretty much like dig into the nitty gritty. But I feel like we're doing that. We've started that process here, and so it's gonna be like this global shift as it progresses. So I don't know if you have like an insight on that, or what you think about that whole.
Well, when it comes to AI, it's a tool. The reality is, if you're open to it, what I can see, it's gonna make the human life experience better. When it does get rid of certain jobs, all those type of jobs, a lot of them are redundant. They're not really life. What I think is gonna be a beautiful part is that for human beings in general, they're gonna be able to now focus on the experiences. And for us as people, what we pick up as we live life are impressions. So what's going to happen to us as people when we're creating and synthesizing better impressions for the human experience? And how will our consciousness that we still can't even wrap around evolve? The only thing I can see is all of us becoming more. And I like the idea of how it says to humble. And I say it because I do believe it's going to make people have a better outlook at life. I think people will definitely become more positive. Because if you have a feeling of entitlement, then it's very hard to be positive because you never have known that experience. You've never had it inside you. And AI can only be used as a tool. Just because AI is around doesn't mean that as a human being you have to now stop developing. I think the most beautiful part is that it really gives us an opportunity to continue to develop, to continue to expand our internal growth. When you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what happens when you completely get rid of need? Then as people, we're led to be our most creative self. We could focus on the arts. We could focus on development, evolution. Then what does life become like? When we're focusing on creating experiences for all of us. When we're focusing on tapping into human consciousness. Because so many people are unaware. So many people, their beliefs that they currently carry are the ones that have been imprinted on them, and they don't even know. So what happens when people can develop their unconscious bias? What happens when people can self-observe better? Now, when it comes to AI is great when it's asked the right question. You still need an evolved human being to ask the right questions. So no matter what, you need people to read, you need people to write, you need people to have conversations so that the right questions can be born. Because if you don't know what you want, if you don't know what your moral highest personal ideal is, it's impossible for you to ask the right questions. And the only way to do that is to develop yourself and for you to evolve who you are. My question is, what will human beings who are at that level of understanding, what will they create with AIs as the tools? Because no matter what, as amazing as an AI is, it'll never understand human consciousness because it's not a conscious entity. Therefore, the question is, what will the symbiotic of consciousness with a supercomputer, what will that bring to the world? Now, of course, that's just my outlook.
Right.
And that's, me thinking best case scenario. But am I going to assume worst case scenarios? Absolutely not.